Hey everyone, and welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. Today we have our guest, Brad Couture. He's the Marketing Operations Architect at Tulip. And I decided that it would be great to have Brad on to chat through an important topic I think a lot of marketing ops people run up against, and that's order of operations. And I mean, we are going to go into some benefits of like how to actually execute that in Marketo. So if you're not a Marketo customer, some of this might not be as relevant for you all, but I think it still gets you thinking about how you could maybe structure your order of operations or thinking through like why that's important and how to do that. But we're going to go through a special feature that Marketo has, which is executable campaigns and specifically nested ones. But also focus on order of operations and why that's important. So welcome to the podcast, Brad.
Thank you for having me.
All right, awesome. Well, before we kick it off, I know you have a background in, you used to work at Hubspot and you were an onboarding and implementation specialist there, which is definitely, operations, but you also have a background in sales, or first you started in sales and then recently made that jump into operations. And I just wanted to kind of understand what that path was like and what appealed to you about marketing ops? Because I think for a lot of folks, we kind of fell into it or we're thinking about getting into it. So I think it'd be interesting for this group to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually didn't fall into marketing operations. It was actually something that I kind of identified as something that I wanted to build a career in. But when I came out of school, I thought I wanted to be in sales. So tech sales was kind of a great place to start, especially in Boston. So I started out as a BDR at HubSpot, and this was, I think it was in 2017 or so, and I was on a rather unique team at HubSpot. At that time, they were kind of just building out their corporate and enterprise segment. So it was kind of a new team. The product really wasn't ready for that market. So I was also on the West Coast team, so my territories were at the time Silicon Valley and Seattle. So I was pretty much tasked the hard job of cold calling almost every Pardot and Marketo customer and trying to convince them to switch to HubSpot, which at the time, didn't really have an enterprise, kind of product yet. They were still kind of building that out. So I did that for almost a year, and I figured, I learned that sales is really hard, and I don't think I wanted to be in sales. But I really liked the product, and I liked the kind of conversations that I was having with folks. And I really liked how teams were using the product and how they were using marketing technology. That was something that really appealed to me. So I was able to move over to the onboarding team at HubSpot, which was my last role there. Did that for about a year as well. That was a ton of fun, and I was really working with new HubSpot customers and helping them migrate off of other tools and train their team and really set up a strong foundation for them to be successful with HubSpot. So it was about half of kind of technical setup of the HubSpot instance, and then the other half was kind of marketing operations kind of consulting in a sense, specifically to HubSpot. Yeah. So I did that for about a year, and I a lot of times felt like I was a teacher, just kind of assigning my students homework. That was kind of the playbook at HubSpot. Was ultimately we want to enable the customers to be self-sufficient, so they don't need me or they don't need HubSpot to be successful with the tool. And I was thinking, I know what to do. I would rather just do the work myself. I like it. I would rather just do it and have a little bit more ownership. So at the time I was also kind of just teaching myself Marketo, during my day-to-day, I'd work on XYZ projects in HubSpot, and then I'd go home and be I wonder how, people are doing this in Marketo. So I did that for about a year.
What stood out to you is looking into Marketo? Like, did you learn enough in sales that you could like identify what key features Marketo already had, or had some people you already knew use Marketo? What was, because that isn't something that normally people do. Like, oh, I'm going to go teach myself Marketo.
Yeah. So I think it was a little bit of the former. I didn't have a ton of success cold calling people and convincing them to move to HubSpot. So there was always that kind of like curiosity. It's like
Yeah.
people really seem to like this product,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of really big name companies are using it. And I also just kind of noticed that it seemed like the platform that a lot of folks were really building and developing their career off of.
Yeah.
So, at the time, if I was thinking, I was like, if I really want to have a career in marketing operations, like this seems like the tool to really build and kind of launch my career in it. So that was kind of the rationale behind. And I mean, it wasn't easy. It's really tough to build and learn a platform like Marketo, and you can't really like see the platform and like play around with it or like build things
No.
out unless you have like a login. So a lot of it was like YouTube videos, or they're kind of like university kind of platform, or like scouring through Marketo Nation threads to see what people were doing. So
Yeah, sometimes I wish that Marketo would open it up a bit more, a bit like HubSpot, so we could get more Marketo experts out there. But I think it is something like, I think having that those thoughts are really thinking about like making a career out of it. I think I applaud you, because I think a lot of folks just think like, they see, oh, I'll just learn HubSpot, or I'll just maybe, just do XYZ. They're not thinking about, oh, like what would be a good career building move for me? Like
yeah,
what are the benefits of that? Or what would be a tool that I could really like build a career off of? So I think that that's really interesting. And I think it's true. And we're seeing it. It's probably good timing as well for you, because in the market now, if you're a Marketo user, it's pretty good job security. There's
yeah,
jobs out there for you now. And I think more and more marketing ops is gaining that momentum. So
yeah.
then how did you end up to where you are today at Tulip? Like how did you see that opportunity, and what was it like then going from teaching yourself Marketo to then actually having access to a Marketo instance?
Yeah, so Tulip was actually a HubSpot customer. They
Oh,
were, yeah, they were right in Somerville, which was like 5 minutes from the Cambridge office for HubSpot, which where I
oh,
was working at the time. The team was small. I had chatted with them a couple times. I believe I joined, and I was like the fourth full-time marketer there on
wow.
that team. And they were going through a HubSpot to Marketo migration. And at the time, they knew that Marketo was a little bit more of a sophisticated platform. The team was growing. They needed someone to really own that system, but they also identified that, based off of where they wanted to go, they just needed someone full time for the marketing operations function. And myself having a ton of experience in HubSpot, and also having some introductory experience, I guess I would say, to Marketo, it kind of really fit in well with what they were looking for, and what they needed, in someone to join and kind of own that function. So that's how I got connected with Tulip. And yeah, I think actually having a login, I think there's just like another step of learning and development with like any piece of tool, or in general, like, there's things that you can read and you can kind of conceptualize. But I think it really starts to hit home when you can actually, like go in and kind of like get your hands dirty and like, learn by
Mm-hmm.
doing. I feel like there's a lot of value in learn by doing. Especially for me, I think that's how I learn the best. So, there were
Yeah.
things before I joined Tulip where I felt like I knew the fundamentals. I feel like a lot of these marketing automation tools are very similar in, the fundamentals, but how you do them kind of different. There's differences
Yeah.
between how you do them in different tools. So I kind of knew
Mm-hmm.
the foundation, and then once I had the login, I was really able to start learning more quickly.
Yeah. It's one of those things too, I think for folks who are just getting into learning a platform but especially like a tool like Marketo is like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think a lot of folks will be really confident, like, oh, I can use it, but they're like barely scratching the surface. But then like
Yeah.
once you get into it, you can realize, oh, like this could happen, or this, like all the gotchas really that could happen with the platform. And then you really realize that you're starting to learn.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but I think
That
one
is,
thing that, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that is so incredibly true. Like the more you learn, the more you realize that there's so much more that you like just don't know. It's so true.
Yeah, you'll hit that hump for sure. Like even in
Hmm.
my own career, I was like, oh yeah, and I worked at Marketo, so I had that benefit. Although I did teach myself Marketo while I was at Marketo because I just really wanted to. I saw an opportunity to build a career as well. And at a startup like that, though, no one really
Yeah.
has time to sit down with you. But I think you get to a certain point, especially in marketing ops. I think that's the thing with marketing ops too, is like there's using a platform, there's using a tool, and there's all of that learning curve. But then it's like fundamentally, like there's so much more, like all the systems that hook up to it, all the
Yeah.
processes you need to learn, all the business processing you learn, and also how to like navigate your stakeholders, which is probably one benefit to you as being an implementation or onboarding specialist, is like you really understood like the pain points of like the people you were working with, and also you could figure out, okay, how can I gather those requirements or pain points and then help guide them in a way to like help ease that pain. And that's a lot of like what marketing ops does, or we build features to for them to leverage to support that
Yeah.
process. So I'm sure that's really helped you now in marketing ops. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah. I think system administration is only a small piece of marketing
Mhm.
operations,
Yeah.
and there's tons more that goes into it. Like you said, whether it's managing stakeholders or having business knowledge, or drawing conclusions and making recommendations for strategy. Those are all things that go into it. And my time in a customer facing role definitely gave me some exposure to, one, some business knowledge, because I work with so many different customers, so many different business models, so many
Hmm.
different ways that folks were going to market. But also a huge part of any like CSM or implementation role is like project management. Like,
Hmm.
ultimately getting a migration or getting an implementation across the finish line. Like, there's really strong project management skills that go into it, which in a sense
Totally.
I think translate well to marketing operations, because when you start to have larger projects that go beyond the scope of like just your day to day, that's really where the stakeholder management, like you said, or project management skills come in. Because if it's a project that spans not just the marketing team but also other internal teams, like being able to ultimately move that project along, see success and get it across the finish line is so much more than just being like a Marketo expert or being able to effectively manage the systems.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. 100% agree with that. Okay, so now I think we get into the meat of the discussion, which is going to be around order of operations. And I would say for a lot of Marketo users, but maybe marketing ops folks in general, I think they probably feel the pain of not having their order of operations intact or under control, but maybe don't really realize why that is, or that because of that. So can you discuss just like what order of operations is for our guests, but also the importance of it, like, and also why did you need a solution at Tulip to help you with your order of operations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first part of the question was, kind of like what order of operations is. And the way I think
Yeah.
about it is there are a lot of key processes that happen. Like, let's think specifically around like the marketing to sales handoff. Like
Mm-hmm.
when a demo request comes in through the website, the end goal is the sales team booking a demo and opening up an opportunity. But to get that lead that submitted a form on your website all the way to the end stage of having a meaningful conversation with the sales team, there are a lot of processes that have to happen in the middle of that to make sure that it gets routed to the right person and to make sure that the sales team has all of the data and everything they need to have an impactful and meaningful sales conversation. So things like processing the lead from a marketing standpoint, which could include syncing it to Salesforce and normalizing data and maybe enriching it and scoring it and sorting it into a lifecycle stage. All of those kind of operational processes in the side of marketing, right? And then there's the whole process of actually successfully syncing it to Salesforce. And then there's the other process of actually Salesforce receiving it and whatever tool you're using to actually route it to the correct sales rep. That's a whole other process. And then you can even take it a step further, like if you're using some sort of sales engagement tool, syncing it over to a sales engagement tool like SalesLoft or Outreach and plugging it into the right cadence. So we really enable the sales team, and their job is as efficient and easy as possible to ultimately book some time with this prospect. So there are a lot of these key processes, and they all have to happen in a certain order. And if they happen out of order, or if it's unpredictable and they're all kind of racing to fire first, there's a lot can go wrong, right? You could route the lead to the incorrect sales rep, or it could not have all the data that the sales rep needs to have a meaningful conversation. So I think that's overall what order of operations is. There are things that have to happen in a particular order. And like I said, if these things happen out of order, it can just cause chaos, and it makes things really hard to scale as the sales team grows and as more leads are kind of flowing through these processes.
Totally. Yeah. I think there's a lot of kind of like things that, like you said, that need to happen. So the classic example there is like the data to route. And so that's probably a pain that a lot of people are feeling, like, oh, we have enrichment, but you need to actually enrich the lead, get the data into the right fields, and then send that over to your, Salesforce. You can route it. And a lot of people will combat this with like wait steps, right? Wait steps in Marketo, wait steps in lean data, wait steps like somewhere along the line. But I think, one of the things that inspired this podcast was a blog post that you wrote for LinkedIn recently, and around like eliminating wait steps, like with your process of using executable campaigns in Marketo. But I think that has been our antidote to date of like, okay, how do we handle operations? Okay, let's just put a ton of wait steps and then link all these campaigns together and then like hope for the best. But as we know, there's like sometimes campaigns will fire differently. Some will run concurrently with each other. And it was always really hard to do that, especially in, some systems where you're calling a lot of different like tools or processes to be done. I think going into it, I'd love to go through your kind of method of using a new feature, pretty new. And one of the things that I applaud you is like, I think executable campaigns came out, not too long ago, like this year, but also nested executable campaigns just recently was released. So you're kind of like at the forefront of publicly like using that. And even since then, I've shared it with my team and we're all chatting about, oh, how can we rebuild this for our clients? Or we're already using it. So it's been inspiring, I think, to a lot of Marketo users to actually leverage this. So can you walk us through how you came up with the idea to use it? And I know we could walk through your post on LinkedIn, but also like how you did it. Because I think for a lot of folks who are probably Marketo customers, we have a lot of Marketo customers that listen, but they want to know, also what's the benefit of a nested executable campaign and why that matters. But talk through maybe how you set that up for us.
Yeah, sure. So I'll share my screen here for those people that are watching the recording. Um, so I had written an article on LinkedIn, and I'm sure we can link it for those folks that are listening on the audio version.
Yeah.
But this was something that I was kind of mulling over when the executable campaigns had first come out. Because of the way that they're processed asynchronously instead of request campaigns that will run, like you said, concurrently with other flow steps. I was always kind of thinking of this idea of like, how do we remove all of these wait steps that we have in our Marketo instance? And specifically, the situation that I feel like most Marketo customers will run into is in your Marketo instance, you'll have all of these programs that are generating net new leads, right?
Yeah.
And I think I actually have a screenshot here of what it typically looks like. Yes. So typically, like, if it is a demo request or a web content campaign, like an ebook or something that people are downloading, typically in your program smart campaigns, they'll look something like this, right? You have a lot of program level actions, um, acquisition program status, interesting moments. And then you'll typically have a wait step in here for anywhere for like 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And really what this is for is if a net new lead is going through this program smart campaign, we can't sync it over to Salesforce yet because it hasn't been processed, right? And if we didn't have a wait step here and we synced it directly over to Salesforce without it being processed, it could run into a lot of issues where it's routed incorrectly, it doesn't have the necessary data, it hasn't been sorted into a lifecycle stage yet, and that can just cause like chaos downstream, right? So you typically have a 5 minute wait period in here to allow the new lead processing flow to take action. So this is kind of a high level overview of what we have built in the past. And I feel like this is kind of similar to what a lot of folks are using, right? They have
Hmm.
a select number of actions depending on what your business needs are. You have to select it for the Salesforce sync. Maybe you're running some enrichment, normalizing some data, scoring it, and then ultimately like sorting it into some sort of lifecycle stage. And all of these things are typically like daisy chained together. There's a couple of different ways you could do it. Here we're using program statuses. I've seen folks build it with request campaigns so that
Campaigns. Uh-huh.
so when this one finishes, it requests this and it all happens in order and happens in a line. Um,
Yep.
but this takes time to process, and we can't sync leads over to Salesforce unless this has been processed, because, like I said, it can lead to a lot of chaos downstream. So that was my kind of overall thought was like, all right, these things are asynchronous. Maybe I can use them to bypass all of these wait steps because, like you mentioned, they can be unpredictable. And,
Hmm.
if you have like something goes wrong, if a Marketo pod goes down or if
Right.
your campaign queue backs up, it can cause delays for longer than your wait steps.
Hmm.
And really, I wasn't able to build it out until they allowed us to start nesting them together. Because when you think about it, um, new lead processing, it's more than just one level, right? There's other levels that go into it. All these steps that are kind of daisy chained together. So this is what it looks like in kind of the the format of using these nested executable campaigns. Is instead of using request campaigns or program statuses or however else you're controlling order of operations with request campaigns or the old version, is you're able to nest all of these things together. So how it ends up looking is we have kind of like a master kind of controller that is called by all of these lead generating programs in your Marketo instance. And then
Hmm.
if we take a closer look at that master controller, inside it's executing all of these kind of subsequent campaigns that are all going to happen in order. So for instance, it's going to request the sync with Marketo campaign. And then once that is completed, it'll execute this. And then once that's completed, it'll execute this due to the nature of these things firing asynchronously. And how that's incorporated into your Marketo programs is instead of using a wait step, we can use a choice step here, which is basically saying, someone fills out a form, you're taking all of these program level actions here. And then instead of a wait step, we are saying if marketing processing completed, which is basically just a flag, a way of indicating leads that have been processed and ones that haven't. So it's basically saying if this lead has never gone through marketing processing before, we want to execute that or call that master controller. And due to the asynchronous nature of all of these executable campaigns, it won't move on to this add to Salesforce campaign flow step until it's been completely processed by your new lead processing flow.
Yeah. So this is like the money shot right here. Because if no one's looking at this, but if you're listening, like this is the one thing that everyone struggles with and has to chase down. It's like
Yeah,
once you sync someone to a Salesforce campaign, you're basically syncing them to Salesforce. And if they hadn't
yeah,
done that, or had they done any of their processing yet, that is where you fall down. But also, you want to ensure that you're adding people to a Salesforce campaign. And this is hard to
yeah,
do, to add them to the right campaign, unless it's under like a localized campaign under like your content program or a demo. Unless you're doing something around like, look for this ID now, then add it to this, Salesforce. It's just really tricky to do, or you would have to do that on this Salesforce site itself. But here we're really saying, because of the executable campaign nature, you're essentially saying it's not going to add them to the Salesforce campaign unless that step is done. And in this case, you're actually saying, okay, well, we're only going to really do that for people who are net new or haven't been
yeah,
processed. And so this is the thing that everyone usually chases your tail around. You're like, well, I'm just going to put like a 15-minute wait step here. But then
yeah.
it's just, that's so long. And also that it's just, you're always kind of chasing that. And sometimes some errors might happen or some issues. And to your point, for people who are already in Salesforce or who already been processed, you don't need to wait that step. And
Yeah.
so I think having this extra checkbox to say like, has it been processed already, I think is really useful and key, and highly suggest people go look at this blog post that we'll link in the description to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realize now that we're getting probably a little too technical for like folks to follow along on the audio version. So definitely check out the article. But exactly like what you mentioned here, the wait step. There's a lot of there's a lot of negatives around it, right? It's unpredictable.
Hmm.
Things can happen to it, but also like if you think about your speed to lead or whatever you want to call it, like if we already
Hmm.
have someone that has gone through processing, like it's unnecessary for them to sit in that wait period. Like that is a lead that we could ultimately get to our sales team, that could be routed, that could be plugged into an outreach or sales loft cadence that the sales team could ultimately reach out to faster. So by having kind of this switch in here, this choice step, it is one, making it more scalable and more predictable for net new leads. But for existing leads, it's just going to bypass this altogether, and it's going to
Hmm.
sync an existing lead, to Salesforce, and it's going to be able to go through that other half of the order of operations that much quicker, which I think is a huge benefit for a lot of teams too.
Totally. um yeah, 100%. I think this is really super useful. So obviously this is new. So what was the process like to actually like switch over to this process? Because I think this is what every current Marketo customer is like, oh, this is awesome, but like I have so many programs that add people to campaigns, or how do I know how to make the switch, or how do I do that? What was that process like for you, and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah. So that process of actually like going through all the programs and making updates, like once it was built, that like definitely wasn't fun. But like I had mentioned, like when these executable campaigns like first came out, like this was my initial thought. I was like, oh man, like this would be sweet if I could do this. And unfortunately, we weren't able to until we could nest them. And a huge shout out to Marketo because they released that ability in like I think it was like 2 or maybe 3 months
Three
after.
months, yeah.
Yeah, so really quick turnaround time on that.
Hmm.
But my process was kind of taking a look at what our current new lead processing flow was. And for me, I'm a very visual person. So I spent some time just kind of like whiteboarding and mapping that whole process out. Of really thinking of like, okay, let's say we have using the situation of a new demo request that comes in.
Yeah.
I one mapped out on a macro level, like what is it going to take to ultimately get it to the end state of them booking time and having a conversation with our sales team. So I mapped that out kind of on a macro level. And then for Marketo and marketing specific, I kind of mapped out like, okay, what are the processes, what needs to happen exclusively in Marketo? And then I kind of mapped that out. And then once I had that mapped out, it was much easier to translate um, using these new executable campaigns and being able to nest them together. And I think that part is really key. Like, if you, it can be really, really daunting to just try to do all of this at once. So I really
Yeah.
think like taking some time and mapping it out and also like chatting with other, like if you're doing this for the first time, like talking internally with with other stakeholders and seeing like, you know, what does our process look like? Because it's ultimately going to be different for every business. So having that background and that information first, where you can accurately map it out, makes it much easier to translate that to like Marketo functionality. And okay, here's exactly how we're going to build it. So that process is
Yeah.
really important.
Do you have any like tools that you like to use to map things out? I just like asking people.
Yeah, I have been a free user of Lucid Chart for a while. They have been continuously trying to get me to upgrade, but I typically use that because like I said, I'm a very visual person. So I flow charts, visual graphics. Those are my gigs. So I love having a tool that makes it easy to do that.
For sure, yeah. We use Whimsical, so we always do shout out to Whimsical, even though they have no idea we exist, probably. But like, it's great because it can make creating those charts really easy, like Lucid
Yep.
Chart. So if you're not using any tools like that, and like I love like free tools as well. So like if you are able to use a free Lucid Chart, go and use that.
Yep.
But
Definitely.
mapping things out, like to your point, sometimes we talk about this at CS2, or we start everything with like documentation or documentation template, or most things, especially when we're planning out and we go through kind of our business process review. But it doesn't mean you need to skip those steps internally, especially for something like this. You need to figure out, okay, what are my phases going to be like? Do I need to like
Hmm.
interview people to see if there's any points that I'm missing, or also
Yeah.
get an assessment of like, what are all the programs I need to update? And you can run some good reports, maybe even from the campaign inspector, to do that or
Yeah.
something. So I think mapping out the end state, knowing that you're going to make iterations on it, but then figuring out like all of the requirements and then digging down into the specifics and then building. Like building should literally be the probably one of the the quickest parts, because by the time you get to
Hmm.
building, you already know like what you're going to do and you have it mapped out, and then it becomes just more into this post-mortem kind of testing phase. So with that, once you've turned this on, like, are there any things that you've learned along the way, or any gotchas that you and maybe even for folks who don't use Marketo, but like any things that you may have not thought about that really impact order of operations that you didn't foresee, or any issues or anything that you're starting to see?
So luckily, no issues. So I think first off, like specifically for what we've talked through today with Marketo, um, I've really only seen benefits. Like it processes much quicker, it's more predictable, but in the future, like it's also going to be more scalable, right? Like
Yeah.
the amount and the volume of records that are flowing through it, it's going to work now, and if it grows, exponentially, it's going to continue to work in the future.
Mhm.
Um, Gotcha, you can only nest them three deep. So that is a consideration to keep in the back of your mind if you're building this out in Marketo, which is probably a good thing because since they're asynchronous, if you could just like nest them forever, um, you could probably nest your way into a a lot of like confusion, and it might take a good amount of like legwork on your Marketo instance to like process these things if you like nested them 10 deep. So you can only do them 3 deep. Um, so I think that on like what we discussed on kind of like a macro Marketo
Yeah.
marketing processing level, I think as a whole, when I started thinking about order of operations on a broader scale of like just outside of Marketo, there's a
Hmm.
lot of things that you need to think about in order to control order of operations for these downstream processes, like syncing something to Salesforce and then routing it in Salesforce, and then if you're going to plug it into a sales engagement tool. So there are some things that you need to think about in order to control those steps because they happen outside of just one system. So you
Yeah.
ultimately have to think about a way of how can we have all of these systems talk to each other so it remains in the correct order of operations. Meaning, like how do we tell Salesforce that a lead is done processing in Marketo? Okay, well, we do it this way. And how do we tell our lead routing tool that a lead has been received in Salesforce and it can now be ready to be routed? Okay, well, there's another consideration there. So I think that's also something that you need to think about on more of a macro level. Is like if a lot of these processes are happening in different systems, how do we get all of these tools to talk to each other so it can maintain the correct order of operations throughout your scenario of a new demo request ultimately getting to a sales rep?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's key, and think through, like, I think especially around like the telling the other system. And so like even your
Yeah,
checkbox, I'm sure, comes into play there with your processing complete or something similar, where you can maybe use that now then to like trigger a routing update if you're putting
yeah,
that on the lead record. And but thinking through that, and I think for people that are starting wanting to like make these changes, like it might feel a little bit like you're unraveling, but I think once you do that, and this is like definitely some upfront work when you're trying to get order of operations under control and to do it in a great way, but the time you will save chasing down things not routing properly or questions from sales
yep,
or something like that is actually going to save you that time down the line, so then you can focus on more of like your strategic projects. So I think knowing that this is an investment, it's an investment in your future sanity, but also your time that you can then put into other more important things like operationalizing the rest of your customer journey and making sure that that is like super intact and awesome.
yeah. That is so true. I will say because I've had things like this kind of happen in before where a Marketo instance is running slow, or
Hmm.
these wait steps kind of fail you. And I will say from personal experience, one of the worst things to try to go in and like backlog is anything that is operational processing related, or
Hmm.
these things were routed before they had all of the necessary information, so you have to like go back in and you have to update records and then try to reroute them. It is like that is one of the worst things to try to go through. So it is absolutely an investment, and spending time mapping this out and building it upfront is just going to save you like so much more time in the future if something were to ever go wrong, or just like you said, help save like some of your sanity, because that's one of the least fun things to do is like try to go back in and route correctly reroute things or update data, or this lead was plugged into the wrong outreach cadence because it wasn't processed by marketing first. So that's one of the worst things to try to update.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think this is awesome. What so just to close it out, what's next? Like what's like some cool features or new projects you're working on, and does it include any other use cases for executable campaigns? Are you What's next for Brad Couture? What's our next blog post we're gonna read?
That's a good question. I think I would love to like spend more time kind of on the marketing processing side of things, like outside of how you can use, nestable executable campaigns. I feel like there's just not a lot of content on like setting up that initial marketing operational processing. So that might be something that
Mm-hmm.
I write about in the future, because I feel like there's kind of a gap in resources around that. As far as
Especially
executable
on the sales
campaigns,
engagement side, I will say, like
yeah,
automating, getting
yep,
people into a sales engagement platform. Literally working with one of our architects, like figuring that out for a HubSpot client, which is
yep.
uh, yesterday. So it's definitely something more and more that I think is becoming part of that marketing ops like process, lead processing.
Yeah, I've seen more and more marketing ops roles be responsible for not only like marketing side, but I've seen it shift to almost like what folks call like top of funnel, like all the way
Yeah,
to like opportunity being created. And that's
totally.
absolutely part of that process of like not only handing off the lead to sales, but like making their job easier. And if you're using one of those tools, like making sure it's plugged into the right cadence.
Yep.
Um, I've used, as far as executable campaigns, I haven't found out anything where you can use them nested for. I haven't come across any use cases other than this one we've talked about today. But I am using them for like just on a single level
Single
for a
level,
couple
yeah.
other things, like interesting moments or a couple other like unique use cases. I've actually written another LinkedIn article about that, so maybe we can link that as well, just for like some more examples of how to use single level executable campaigns.
Yeah, Christy on my team just used it, just even just around like timing for not only like lead processing, but there was something between a program where something needed to happen in one program before it could happen into another, and so we've used that there. So cool. Well. Thank you so much, Brad, for joining. For everyone who was just listening, you can come back to cs2marketing.com and go to our forward thinking section and find the article in the description, or it should be there on your podcast player. And if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want to follow Brad, he also posts some awesome content on LinkedIn and some pretty funny stuff as well, and very relatable. So if you want to follow him on LinkedIn, we'll share his LinkedIn profile too. It's just Brad Couture, and he's the marketing operations architect at Tulip. So thanks so much, Brad, and thanks everyone for joining. And we'll see you on the next episode of Forward Thinking. Have a good one.